The battle of wizards and warriors continues with iron swords. The evil wizard Malkill will take the shape of the earth, wind, water, and fire. Farewell! The fate of the world is in your hands!
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Piercing Wizard podcast. I am Mr. Piercing Wizard, and you are...
Mrs. Piercing Wizard.
If you weren't already aware, we were previously engaged, and now we are... Is it unengaged, or...
We're no longer engaged.
We're no longer engaged.
Yeah.
Because we're married.
Yeah.
So, spoiler alert. We are married. It was fantastic. It was very romantic. We had the piercer wedding. We got married by Jeff.
Yeah.
And Caitlin McDermott said some words. So it was a very piercerific wedding.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I enjoyed it. I had a nice time. Got to dress up. Everyone was nice to me.
Yeah.
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 Solid.
So, we're married. So, yep. We've got a couple of things that we want to mention early on in the episode. We haven't opened registration for it yet, but we will be doing a live seminar in the Chicago area in mid-July 2026. So stay tuned to ryanpba.com or this podcast or our social media. We'll be opening up registration pretty soon. But for now, if you're interested in it, you can go to the description for this episode. There's a little link to a Google form. You can sign up to get notifications about registration opening, and you can vote on what content you want us teaching at the seminar. So look forward to that mid-July 2026 in the Chicago area. And what else are we getting ready for in the short term?
Well, I think it's important that people understand a lot of thought goes into how you select sites and locations, like places to travel to for the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I do like analytics and everything.
Why are we going to Chicago?
Okay, so it's not for a deep reason. I've done classes in Chicago several times before for piercer reasons, but almost all the time when I go to Chicago, it's for wrestling shows. The first couple times I went to Chicago, it was because that's when like All In and All Out were happening, the shows that were the precursors to AEW. I'm getting to the G-Fest thing.
Okay.
So Lola and I have been together for years. Lola lived in Glasgow, and there was an American publication called G-Fan. Lola is an enormous fan of Godzilla. So G-Fan was the nerd magazine for fans. And why don't you, you used to try to buy it in comic book stores over there?
Yeah, the comic book store I went to would only get one a quarter or something. So if you didn't get in there fast and grab it, someone else would take it.
So one of my early romantic gestures in our relationship was to get my own subscription to G-Fan, and then I bring them over to her, or was previously bringing them to her in Glasgow because I'm a romantic. And the people who put on the G-Fan magazine also put on an annual nerd convention called G-Fest, and it's typically in Chicago. And since now you are an American, I thought that we could go to Chicago and we could go to G-Fest. And it just so happens to be in mid-July in Chicago. Mm. So it's been a few years since I've done a class in Chicago, so I thought I was due for another one. So we'll be doing a seminar together. Lola and myself will both be teaching classes at it, but we'll also be in Chicago to stomp on buildings and wear big kaiju suits.
I'm looking forward to going to a conference that's not a piercing conference, because I've never been to a conference. I've been to like markets and stuff, but I've never been to a designated conference for a specific topic that wasn't piercing. So I'm kind of excited to see what the vibe is, how different, just how it's organized and all that kind of stuff. But we've got APP conference coming up before then, so I'll have something to compare it to. Yeah.
Do you think all the G-Fest people all gossip about each other, like the APP conference?
Right. I just want to know if the vibe is the same or if it's different.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
So we'll be in Chicago in July. I think that's really great. So APP conference, that will be the month previous. That'll be June in Vegas. We're both going to be teaching classes there. I'll be vending there with more shirts. If you're a Patreon subscriber and you're going to be at conference in Las Vegas, you can stop by our booth for a chance at getting your Patreon thank you shirt. We've done that years in the past, really popular. We've got a really cool, really fun design.
It's really good.
For the Patreon shirt this year. And we've got a bunch of other really cool designs this year too. We're retiring some of our designs and we're bringing in some new ones. So stop by the booth and check it out. It should be really fun this year.
Yeah, I saw somebody post today that it was like, I can't remember the exact number, but like 48 or 45 days to go to conference or something. And it made me want to throw up.
Right.
It made, like I read it and I was just like, ooh.
I am not ready yet. I will be ready, but I am not ready yet. I get to bring Evan Quino, the piercer from my shop. I get to bring Evan again this year. It's been a few years since Evan's been able to make it out to Vegas. Zach Boyer is going to be covering our shop up here in New Hampshire. So that should be really fun. It's a lot of work going into the APP conference, but it's very satisfying. It's a very satisfying work week.
This will be my first time attending since the APP election. So I'm excited / scared.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's all good.
Yeah.
So not the APP, but the UK APP are also having an election at the moment. I think if I've got my dates right, by this point, everybody should have been contacted and nominated and accepted or not accepted their nominations. How dare you not accept your nomination, Ryan?
Was I nominated? Oh yeah, you nominated me. I am a UK APP member, but I don't really feel like I have the time to dedicate to that role. But we know someone who did accept their nomination.
Yes.
And that's Jordan Jones.
Also
from
nominated by
Forest.
me.
Well, and me too, and a couple other people, I'm sure. But I thought that Jordan would be great for the role because he's one of those like, what can I do to help kind of people. And he's not like a theoretical, oh, maybe I could do this thing. He's like, this is my plan of how to get this thing done. These are the resources I need, the time I need, and these are my goals. So I would love to see Jordan on the UK APP
He is
board.
incredibly proactive, super resourceful, and you know how important my studio is to me. Yeah. And I leave it in his hands every single day that I'm not here. And there's nobody in the world that I trust more to carry that. And I just, I think if you're listening and you're taking part in the UK APP elections, please vote for Jordan because I can't think of a better way for him to take all of that energy and put it into something that could really help and give back to the community, which is something he's been wanting to do for a long time now. So, yay, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Jordan Jones for the UK APP Board of Directors. So we're going to go ahead and get into the meat of the episode. We have kind of a deep dive episode for you, a technical info episode for you about sterilization, disinfection, a couple other things that you might find useful if you're working in a piercing shop. But this was your idea for an episode. So how did this like start to gel for you? Like, why did you come up with this idea for an episode?
Well,
by getting frustrated at Instagram posts?
So I made a note. Sometimes we make little notes for things to do for the podcast, and a lot of the time they're kind of nonsensical. And I just have one that says, people loudly and confidently being wrong on the internet.
Yeah.
So, we kind of wanted to do a podcast that was just going back to basics, like back to fundamentals in terms of like terminology, and trying to just make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to certain things. Because when I first started piercing, I don't know if it was different for you, but when I started, I was like terrified for other piercers to see what I was doing, because I had that thing in my mind where it's like, I know I must be doing stuff wrong, and I don't really understand how or why or what it is I'm doing wrong, but I know I must be doing something wrong.
Is there like a little thing about being from Brittany that you have no confidence in things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm an American and I am always supremely confident in everything I'm doing.
I think it was Bill Bailey that said it's overcast 80% of the time and it infuses us with a sense of melancholy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure, so don't quote me. So I've was nervous for other piercers to see like what and how I was doing, even though I was trying my best. And when I finally let another piercer in that, you know, I didn't really know, to look at my work, they had critiques and they had input, and that was hard for me and it was scary, but it was also really helpful and really good for me and something that I really needed. So it's like, now when I go on social media, I'm just seeing like people loudly and confidently being wrong. And part of me is that, oh, I love that for you. But another part of me is like aware of how dangerous that is, and how like you can, you know, it's like a spectrum. There's, you know, one way you can go and another way you can go. And being so like sharing so much when you're doing stuff that's wrong on a technical level makes me nervous for people in how that might come back to bite them.
Right.
Like, say, this is an example I've given before. When you're not using your sterilizer properly and you film yourself not using it properly, and then you post the video of you not using it properly, and then a client sees you not using it properly, how is that not an enormous risk for you in terms of liability?
Sure.
So, you know, that kind of thing got us onto this topic of just wanting to try and help out by going back and just recovering some basic terminology to hopefully help fill in some of those fundamental gaps for people.
Yeah, and I just want to remind people that when you see content online, you see someone's Instagram or TikTok or something like that, you should really see it as opinion. It really probably hasn't been vetted. It probably hasn't been peer reviewed. It probably hasn't been like compared to industry standards or organizational standards. Like when you go to a class at the APP conference, as an example, there are mechanisms in place to verify that the information in classes at the APP conference align with technical fact, scientific fact, APP membership requirements, all those different things. There are checks and balances, there's a curriculum committee and all that stuff. But when you're seeing someone's Instagram post or TikTok, it's just them saying stuff. And just because they said stuff doesn't mean that they're saying something correctly. Or if they're showing something, narrating something, it doesn't mean that it's correct. So we wanted to talk about some of the different things that we might have seen somewhat recently on social media. We're definitely not the type of people where we're going to call anybody out. We're not
No.
going to reference any posts, any piercers, any studios, any companies, anything. We want to talk about just some of the generalities. But we also want to remind people that you should do your due diligence and you should verify technical information. If somebody says you can do this, you can't do that, do some research. And you know, if it's just Google University or if it's something else, like find out the information. If something seems a little bit iffy, like, oh, I didn't think you could use this thing in this way, you might be right, they might be wrong. So there's nothing wrong with doing a little bit of research and trying to verify this information.
So, just to kind of reinforce what Ryan's saying, we're going to talk in vague terms about a couple of things that we've seen online. None of these things are unique to one person. None of them are inspired by one person. So if you feel like, oh, I've done that, please don't feel like we're watching you like some evil eye. These are just things that we've observed and honestly felt like we could put out some helpful information to hopefully minimize risk for some clients and some piercers out there. So I just wanted to reinforce that this is coming from a place of like, we want to help you out with this stuff.
So, you know, something that I've noticed as content is the stuff that's lighthearted. It's meant to be kind of joking around in the studio, and a lot of times it's content made by a piercer for an audience of piercers. It's one of those like, hey, these are some silly things about our job. And I think that can be really entertaining, but sometimes it can be very misleading to people who are not in the industry and don't really understand what it is you're doing, the materials you're playing around with or whatever. So how do you feel about posts like that?
So I saw a couple of posts that involved, I guess, what we'll call horseplay, which makes me sound 80 years old, horseplay, with clamps, like contaminated clamps, kind of like making light, making jokes about, you know, things that you have to do as a piercer or as a studio apprentice with contaminated clamps. And it was I think the first time for me that I've seen, I'm not going to say it's the first time, but like the first time I've seen examples of people kind of like joking around with contaminated clamps, or like clamps that maybe aren't contaminated but are presented
As
as
contaminated.
contaminated. And I found it a little bit shocking. Like, I like internet silliness. I'm a big fan of the silliness, but I feel like there are just some things where it's like you can't really joke around with it in the same way, because it's increasing your exposure to the most high risk thing in your studio. And even if it's pretend and maybe they're not really contaminated and the whole thing is staged, it's creating the image that they are, which means people then might want to replicate that, and maybe that person is using contaminated clamps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we just wanted to go over some of the risks and issues around handling contaminated tools if you're in a reprocessing studio. Just a couple of terms that are really important.
So you and I have been teaching the safe practices in the piercing room class at the UK APP conference and pretty much all the other conferences that I do internationally, especially if it's my first time at a conference. I always suggest that that's the first class that I teach at their conference, because I think it's so important for people to understand the safety elements of, how do you handle a sterilized item? How do you use that item? And then how do you handle it after it's contaminated? I think all those things are massively important. So I've been teaching some version of this class for more than 10 years. You and I have been teaching it together off and on for the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm currently working on a part 2 of that class that I'll be debuting at the UK APP conference this year, kind of about this subject. Like, when you have a tool that's been used, that's been exposed to somebody's bodily fluids, blood, saliva, whatever, how are you handling that? If you're a reprocessing studio, how are you correctly and safely reprocessing that item so that it can be sterilized again, used again, similar to how it might be reprocessed in a dental office or in a medical setting. But if you're kind of making jokes about it and you're kind of saying like, oh, this isn't important or that's not important, I get if you're trying to make something as entertainment, but like Lola said, you don't want to confuse someone who might not understand all the different things that go into handling that contaminated item.
So one of the terms that we wanted to talk about was droplet splatter. So droplet splatter, in this instance, we're talking about when tools are being reprocessed or decontaminated, the little tiny droplets of liquid that can splash off of the tools and end up on your body, on your clothing, on the walls, on the flooring. For anyone that's interested in the topic, there was an interesting study that was done. There's a lot of interesting studies that have been done, but there's an interesting study that was done in 2022 that you can read about on the American Journal of Infection Control, that takes place within a really well-designed, centralized, high-level disinfection unit. And it had some amazing visuals, basically showing the spread of droplets using, I forget the term for it, but there's basically like paper that you can see really obviously on it where the droplets have landed and that kind of thing. And it was really interesting to see how in an environment far more advanced than ours, using equipment that is arguably, at least in some instances, superior to a lot of the equipment that we're using, and seeing just the mess that is created and generated by tool reprocessing. It is a messy, messy process. So I would definitely check out some of those images. The cast-off range for droplet splatter is a lot bigger than I think a lot of people think. And when it comes to PPE, wearing why can't I remember the word? Plastic aprons and boot covers and arm covers and gloves and all that kind of thing. I think a lot of us have a false sense of security with PPE, where we feel like, oh, PPE is going to keep me safe from everything.
I'm wearing the fucking hat.
I'm wearing the fucking hat. Which is from Chernobyl, if people don't know what that is. It's a TV show. Oh yeah, people have this false sense of security sometimes with PPE, and they forget that in actual fact, PPE is like your last last line of defense after everything else. So there's another interesting visual that might be helpful for some people that you can find on the CDC website and probably a lot of other websites, which is the hierarchy of controls. And it basically shows a diagram of different things that you can implement before you get to PPE. And how PPE is the last factor in making you safer at work after everything else has been implemented. Do you want to maybe
Yeah,
read some of those?
you can Google this yourself, Centers for Disease Control Hierarchy of Controls. So it's an upside down pyramid, and at the top is elimination. Elimination would be just removing the hazard from your space. So like the way that we might eliminate the hazard of reprocessing tools in the studio is the whole concept of disposable only tools, which I think is great. That's a great method of eliminating the hazard of having to reprocess a tool. I don't want to say that reprocessing a tool is impossible to do safely, because I reprocess in my studio. I have for years. Lots of other studios do. The body piercing industry was really built on reprocessing tools, and the idea of fully disposable studios is relatively new. So I'm not trying to say that you have to go disposable, but I'm just saying that that is one version of elimination as far as hierarchy of controls. The next step down would be substitution, so replacing the hazard. So if it's something like I'm using a tool and these tools might be reprocessed, that could be kind of what you're doing at Forest in the UK, where you have a recycling bin for used tools. So the tool is getting used, it's getting put into a recycling bin or a reclamation bin that's being picked up by a vendor, and then you can purchase new tools from that vendor. So that might be one version of substitution. Then you'll have engineering controls. That's isolating people from the hazard. So that would be something like you have a dedicated space in your studio, you have a processing area, you have a contaminated sink, you have a contaminated room, you have something behind a door. That's an engineering control to keep people away from that hazard, the contaminated tools that are being reprocessed. Next down is going to be administrative controls, changing the way people work. So those administrative controls would be your standard operating procedure, your training that says this is how this thing can be handled, this is how this job can be performed safer in the studio. This is how you avoid, don't touch these contaminated tools with your bare hands, and don't leave them on this countertop, and don't carry them through this space. All those different things are administrative controls. And then after you've taken all of those other steps, elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, then you get down to personal protective equipment. And that's okay. If there's a task that can't be eliminated, it can't be substituted, it can't be changed or minimized with engineering or administrative controls, and you have to actually touch a thing and perform a service, personal protective equipment has to be worn so that you can perform that service safely. So that'll be your gloves, your apron, maybe face protection, maybe some other personal protective things, eye shields, things like that. But that's the CDC hierarchy of controls. And if you're going to process a used item in your studio, you really need to understand all those different factors. If you're working in a studio and it's your job to do it, or if it's your job to kind of support someone else to do it, you should be trained really thoroughly by your studio. And ideally, you should have this all written down so you can always go back and you can reread it, you can reference it, and you can just verify what all these different steps do and what your responsibilities are in the studio.
You'll notice nowhere in the hierarchy controls is there a step for comedy with the tools. That's not in there. But like when you read about this, like I think a lot of piercers, their mind will go to like, well, does that mean that I have to get a Hydrum? I can't afford that, or like some big expensive thing. When in actual fact, things like engineering controls and administrative controls can be lots of things. Like one of the things that came up from the report that I was reading, the study that I was reading, was that one of the simplest ways to help reduce droplet splatter was by lowering the water pressure. Like having high water pressure causes the water to splash everywhere, which creates droplet splatter, So this is like the simplest possible thing. And then of course, I don't know if this is still something that's in the BBP training, which I should know because I do it every year. But I'm not sure if it's been updated out of it. But when I first started doing the APP bloodborne pathogen training course, I saw little baby Jeff doing his section on reprocessing, and it mentioned scrubbing tools underwater. And I didn't know that then. Like the first time I did it, I didn't know that then. I was scrubbing them in solution, but they weren't fully submerged. And another observation from this droplet splatter study was scrubbing tools under the water. And there was an improvement with the droplet detecting paper used when that was implemented. So these are the simplest, most don't cost any money things that you could do to minimize droplet splatter in the reprocessing area. But having looked at that and seeing the impact on the droplet detecting paper, when I saw these kind of like comedic posts where people are playing around with clamps, all I could think about was like that imagery of the spread of potential harmful bacteria. So I think once you have the visual to accompany it, it's hugely, hugely helpful. But yeah, possibly a good idea to stay away from comedy with the most dangerous items in the building.
Yeah. So you brought up something too, and it's in your notes here, that like it can be kind of a ticking time bomb, because I don't ever want a body piercer or a shop to get sued. But let's imagine that we live in a country where people are a little bit quick to lawsuits. America, very sue happy. If someone has an infection and they can kind of point a finger at your studio as being the source of that infection, if you have like comedy posts on your social media about like jokingly not processing tools correctly, that's definitely going to be shown in court as evidence against you. So, keep some of that stuff in mind. And like, I'm not trying to say that like all of your social media has to be very dry and not funny. Like, I want people to show off their personalities. But don't forget that like, if you're making piercer content and you're putting it out there for the general public, people might misunderstand what your content is about.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth keeping in mind as well that as much as we care enormously about what it is that we're doing, the actual job or qualification of a certified surgical tech is something that can take 1 to 2 years. Sometimes it can be less depending on the avenue into that field, but this is like a real job that people have actual qualifications in that they spend months studying for. There's definitely a lot more to it than just wearing like a plastic apron. So I think that it's just nice for us to take that seriously. Like, I didn't really, part of me feels like it's silly. We're at a point where I'm like, please take it seriously. The clamps in your studio.
This is what makes me so nervous about an industry that's leaning very heavily into single-use, disposable, recycle, reclaim items. And like, I don't think any of that is the negative. I don't think disposing of the tool, only using it once, getting a new one, I don't think that that's bad in any way. But what I do think is bad is that a lot of the education about, okay, what about the other side of the coin? What about all these other studios out there in the world who like severely outnumber the single-use studios, like reprocessing studios, for better or worse? It's like 100-to-1 ratio for studios. And I don't see a lot of education about safe reprocessing. I see lots of classes about how to incorporate single-use and disposable into a shop. But at a lot of those conferences and in a lot of those spaces, I don't see the other side of the coin about like, okay, if you're not there yet, if you're not a disposable shop and you're reprocessing these tools, here's how to do it safely. So I still just want to make sure that people are focusing on the education of reprocessing if you're doing that in your studio. So a couple of quick things that I want to talk about. Let's say you're completely done with a pair of clamps. Now, what's going to happen with that pair of clamps? What I would want to see happen is you immediately start processing that tool. And I don't mean carrying that tool into like a bio room and scrubbing it like the second after you're done using it. But you don't want to allow a contaminated item to dry, because if you allow a contaminated item to dry, it's immediately going to start producing biofilm. There's going to be basically a bacterial colony that will start growing, start propagating on the surface of that tool. Just like any contaminated work surface, like that's why it's so important to immediately disinfect your work surfaces when you're done with a body piercing before you bring the next client in. There might be pathogens present. You don't want them to be able to propagate. You don't want them to be able to spread and potentially infect someone. So when you have a tool, you can submerge it in a liquid. Some people will submerge it in a disinfectant. Some people will spray it with an enzymatic foam, which is my preference. I don't like to have sloshy liquids in my piercing room that might need to be transferred into another room. Sometimes you might need a special container with a locking lid to prevent the chances of any sort of spills or splatter accidents. But what you don't want to do is allow that tool to just dry, because it'll start to grow biofilm on the surface of the tool. And part of biofilm production is it's kind of protecting itself with a layer of proteins. So it will make it more and more challenging to properly clean that tool when it gets to the next step. So once you get your tool into your processing area for your next step, a fork in the road might be like, are you doing a chemical process? Are you doing a mechanical process? Are you doing a physical manual process? So are you scrubbing a tool? Are you putting it into an automated instrument washer like a Hydrum? Are you putting it into an ultrasonic? Are you using any sort of chemicals for a soak? Or are you doing any sort of rinsing, things like that? All those things will have risk to them. So you have the potential risk of chemicals, but then you also have potential risk of contaminated liquids. Once you're introducing a contaminated item to that liquid should also be considered contaminated, which means that you have to be very cautious to prevent splatter, to prevent spills, to make sure that you have the right kind of PPE and that you're transporting that contaminated liquid properly and safely. If you're doing something mechanical to clean your tool, you want to make sure that you have an ultrasonic that's rated for the instrument that you're trying to clean. You can buy really cheap ultrasonics online, but those are ultrasonics for something else, like cleaning glasses or traditional jewelry, like bracelets and necklaces. Ultrasonics basically create cavitation. So it might sound like a vibration, but it's not shaking oils and debris off of an item. It's actually creating cavitation, which is the implosion of the oxygen in that liquid. So what it's actually doing is pulling things off of the surface of the item, pulling things out of hinges, out of lumens, things like that. So an ultrasonic for used equipment for body piercing should be the same kind of rating as tools for dental processing, medical processing. There are different kinds of ultrasonics out there, so you want to make sure that you're using the right kind and that it's rated for processing medical or dental equipment and not things like, watches and glasses, things like that. If you're going to be scrubbing rather than using something mechanical, like Lola was talking about, you want to reduce splatter as much as possible. So imagine you just have a clamp and you're just brushing it with something that might look like a toothbrush or like a small brush. I think like if you look at your bathroom mirror just from like brushing your teeth, you're going to see splatter all over it. That same splatter will happen when you brush essentially anything with moisture. You'll get little bits of splatter that will go off in every direction, and that can travel a lot farther than you might anticipate. So if you want to maybe reduce some of that splatter, you can scrub it submerged. One way to do that is you just have basically like a small tub or a bin in your sink. That gets filled with water, and then you're going to put the tool in there and you're going to lightly scrub it with a brush. The risk that you want to be aware of, though, is if you're scrubbing something and the item you're scrubbing or the tool you're using to scrub is a little bit too stiff, or if you're holding it a little bit too close to your fingers, you could potentially damage a glove and expose yourself to contaminants. So you just want to be like really aware and thoughtful. Don't put yourself at an additional risk by wearing cheap, flimsy gloves. You don't want to be using like a metal brush that could puncture right through your glove. You want to make sure that you're wearing thicker gloves, nitrile gloves, potentially double layering gloves. You want to have appropriate gloves for scrubbing a contaminated item. Then there are things like automated tool washers, something like a Hydrum that's actually, it's kind of like a dishwasher, but it's made to a more of a medical standard. Hydrum would be the one sold by Sycan, the company that makes Statums. And it's an instrument washer for disinfecting medical tools, dental tools, things like that. It is not a dishwasher. You don't want to just get a dishwasher installed in your studio and try to put a tool in that. It needs to be rated for the specific tools that we're using in our studio. But all those processes carry risk to them. You're handling contaminated liquids, potentially, contaminated biological material. So you really want to make sure that you understand your risks, understand how to transport those items, and understand how to perform the task safely. And that's really not something that I want to see people joking about online. Like, I don't want to be like a curmudgeon, like you're not allowed to make jokes on the internet, but maybe pick a different category for your content.
I think stuff like this is super interesting as well because it can help provide context for some of the rules or suggestions that people don't always agree with. Like, for example, not having any reprocessing equipment in your piercing room. For example, in the droplet study that I was referencing earlier, they were finding droplet splatter 7 feet away from the scrubbing site. So it's just really good to see these examples and see informative images of that as well. I think that once you can see it, it's hard to unsee it.
Yeah, so ultrasonics have been around in piercing and tattooing for quite a while. But I remember when I started piercing in the 90s and the early 2000s, the first shop that I worked in that had an ultrasonic for processing used items, it was probably more for like tattoo tubes, but it didn't have a lid on it. It was just like an open top ultrasonic, and it would just be buzzing away over in the corner somewhere. And in that corner and on the wall, there would just be this like gross condensation, because it's not just, warm liquid evaporating up and out. It's droplets that are getting kind of shot out in and spread around the room. So there used to be this thing in the industry before the quality of ultrasonics that we have access to now. It's not really what we had access to 20, 25 years ago. So when they were like loose tops, when they were just like loose lids that would just rest on top of an ultrasonic, a common practice, and ones that I would even bring up in classes like Safe Practices, would be you'd buy a bunch of disposable shower caps, and you would put the disposable shower cap over the ultrasonic for every single cycle. And just in that 30-minute, 60-minute, whatever it was cycle, the whole shower cap would be full of condensation that otherwise would have just been spread around the room as an airborne contaminant. So you really do want to pay attention to stuff like that. Like Lola said, like sometimes people get grumpy as to like, well, why can't I have this equipment in this space? And it's because you need to keep the things that are casting out contaminants away from the clean areas and working areas in your studio. So it's not safe to have your ultrasonic right next to your autoclave, because you're going to be contaminating the air in the space around that autoclave. So something like an ultrasonic, something like a contaminated sink for rinsing or potentially even scrubbing contaminated tools, that really needs to be segregated to its own area, behind a door or with lots of space. Like Lola said, 7 feet of space potentially between that contaminated item, that contaminated task, and the rest of the studio to protect it. So you just want to understand those little like safety elements. And if you're not getting it when you see like content like infotainment online, sometimes you might accidentally think like, well, what, it's fine to stick an ultrasonic or something contaminated right next to like my hand washing sink, as an example.
Yeah, I think that's where room layout as well is also really significant. Like, if you're thinking, well, I can't physically get that amount of space between one thing and another in a linear fashion, there might be another way of setting up your space. Like, for example, when I joined the UK PP, I don't know if it's still the case because I'm still a member, so I haven't had to join again. But they had a rule that was, okay, you need 4 feet between your ultrasonic and your autoclave. And I remember people pitching a fit about it at the time, like people being like, this is ridiculous, this, like it was this crazy thing. And then, you look back now and you're like, 4 feet, that's nothing, like, especially when we're considering like 7 feet of potential droplet splatter. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and definitely one that makes it worthwhile to go to those, air quotes, fundamental classes. Like when you do safe practices or when we do it together, I always have this like self-conscious feeling where it's like, am I just telling people stuff they already know? And every year it's like, we aren't. This is the first time that a lot of people are hearing this. So we really wanted to do this episode that was just kind of like revisiting some of those basics a little bit, or possibly talking about them for the first time. And another one of those subjects that came up when we were preparing for this episode was skin lubricant.
Yeah. So this is, again, not directed at anybody specifically, because this has been a pet peeve of mine for years at this point. When you're seeing that like piercer content out there, there's lots of different categories of it. Like you do a lot of stuff where it's kind of like, whimsical, and you're trying to kind of put a smile on somebody's
Whimsical?
face.
Me?
Some of them are just like, here's a picture of a nicely done piercing or some nice jewelry or something. Here's maybe a short video or something like that. But I'm seeing a lot more content on public social media that falls into like, watch me do this piercing. And I've never been a huge fan of that. Like, I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world to show like, here's a safe piercing and how it's done. I think that can be a good inspiration to people who haven't been exposed to safe piercing practices. But I think that there's also like the risk that you run, because if you're showing something that might not be of like an accurate scientific standard, if you're showing something that might accidentally, unintentionally fall into an unsafe practice, people might see it and not understand what's going on, and they might just try to replicate it. And one of the bigger things that I see on a somewhat frequent basis is people using inappropriate items as lubricants for their piercing needle. So here's a couple of ways that I want to describe it, and we have some terminology that we're going to clarify as we go. A body piercing is broken skin. You are creating a penetration of the skin. You're breaking the skin with the piercing needle, and you're installing jewelry. Now, there is a difference between just broken skin and a puncture wound. A puncture wound, which is what we would call a body piercing, penetrates deeper into the tissue. It's not a surface abrasion. When you hear broken skin, that's a little bit of a vague term. So a body piercing is broken skin, but it's more accurately a puncture wound. Something else that could fall into broken skin category would be something like a scraped knee,
tattoo,
or a scratch, a tattoo. Perfect example of broken skin. So the skin is non-intact, but a piercing is a little bit more specifically a puncture wound. So we want to talk about the differences of that and the risks that it will bring up if you're using an inappropriate item for a lubricant. But I also want Lola to kind of clarify on some other things too.
So there are some other pieces of terminology that come up quite often, which is internal use and external use. Mucous membrane is another bit of terminology that sometimes comes up as well. Now, when we talk about external use, when we see something that says external use only, we're talking about outside of the body, intact skin, like for example, when you're using most soaps and cleansers and things.
Moisturizers.
It'll be for external use. Now, when it says internal use, that doesn't necessarily mean deep inside broken skin or a puncture wound. Internal use could refer to things like vaginal use, anal use, when you're talking about different types of lubricants. So something being safe for internal use doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe for a deep puncture wound. So a lot of these terms can be misinterpreted. The mucous membrane, that refers to parts of the body where the skin is very, very thin. It's a different type of skin. So like inside the nose, around the genital area. These are examples of mucous membrane.
Inside the mouth.
Inside the mouth. Like these are examples of mucous membrane. So it's kind of, it's not quite external skin. It's not quite internal skin. It's the mucosa or mucous membrane. So just because something says it's safe for internal use, that doesn't necessarily mean it's designed to go inside the body underneath the skin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, as a puncture wound. So
Right.
if we're talking about different types of lubricant, if we're talking about outside of body piercing, some of us might think of like sexual lubricants. Those can be things that can be water-based. Sometimes they can be silicone-based. They can be other different chemicals. And those will be tested and labeled as safe for internal use. And that can be safe for, genital use, other areas, mucosa, things like that. But that same product, if it was introduced into a puncture wound, could create a risk. So I want to talk about some of the different kinds of lubricant that might commonly come up within the body piercing industry. So just a couple of different things that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about something that might be petroleum based. We'll talk about something that might be more accurately labeled as a skin cleanser. And then we'll be talking about things that are marketed as, labeled as, sold as lubricants. So where do you want to start with this?
So I think that we'll just begin at the beginning with petroleum. So a lot of piercers, hopefully not anymore now, but I'm sure it still happens, where a lot of the time when people first started out with piercing and they needed a lubricant, because of that overlap with the tattoo industry, there's often a lot of Vaseline around.
Or A&D ointment.
Yeah, something along those lines. And Vaseline obviously is a brand name. Petroleum jelly isn't suitable to be put in a puncture wound deep inside the body. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. It's not harmful to the body, like it's not going to do any direct damage, but it can cause indirect damage because it can't be absorbed into the body, so it sits there, which means that it can debris can become trapped in it. It can also prevent the wound from draining because it acts as a physical barrier between your body and the jewelry, so this can prevent drainage. And also for piercing wounds to start healing, or really for any wound to start healing, what happens is that your body quickly forms a microscopic natural plaster made of fibrin and platelets to seal the wound. And applying an oil-based substance like Vaseline immediately to that can cause that film to be disrupted before it stabilizes. So this is like structural disruption. It's not it's not destroying the environment, but it's creating disruption. And I think that it's interesting to understand that mechanism, because you might think, well, why is it not safe to use, Vaseline or petroleum jelly? Because we see it used on wounds all the time. Like, MMA is a big example. When people get the big dollop of petroleum jelly like on cuts on their faces and stuff, and it really is just an immediate stop bleeding kind of thing.
Yeah, it's packing the wound.
Yeah, so that's very different from something being used in a puncture wound where it's going to be left there.
Petroleum products, A&D products, like we might be really familiar with those in a body art studio environment because of tattooing. I'm familiar with it because of scarification. When I'm performing scarification and it's done, I'll basically put on like a petroleum ointment to help make it less susceptible to bacteria when it's being bandaged. If someone's performing a tattoo and they're constantly rubbing petroleum jelly on it, Vaseline, A&D ointment, it's probably because they want to lessen the bleeding while they're tattooing and soothe the skin. Petroleum ointments can be safe to use on broken skin, meaning a very shallow, superficial break in the skin. A tattoo is a perfect example, scarification or wound from something like a fight. But you can't take that same product and insert it into the skin with a puncture wound. So that's why you wouldn't want to take your piercing needle, dip it in Vaseline, and then use that as a lubricant, because you would be forcing that petroleum ointment into a puncture wound rather than it sitting on top of a superficial wound and being pushed away through the healing process, pushed away through a scab forming or exudate being secreted. So petroleum for that kind of broken skin use is very different from using it for a puncture wound.
See, I think that that's interesting though, because it just helps provide a little bit of background into what those differences are, because you would be totally understandable in thinking, well, it says safe for broken skin, and here's all this examples of how it's used on broken skin. And it's not till you understand the mechanism of the specific problems that it causes with puncture wounds that you would understand the difference.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a really good example of a fundamental difference in terminology between broken skin and punctured skin or a punctured wound.
Yeah, it's basically clogging the site. You're inserting something into that puncture wound that is not water-based, that is not able to be broken down by the body. So it's just kind of like stuck inside that puncture wound. And it makes it a lot more challenging for your body to heal that wound. So another product that I'm sometimes seeing used as a needle lubricant, and this is the one that probably drives me the most nuts, because I think a lot of piercers, even if they don't know why, they know that they shouldn't be using petroleum ointment as a needle lubricant. But I do see a concerning amount of body piercers using something like a PCMX skin cleanser as their needle lubricant. So there's a couple of different ways I want to break this down and explain why it's not safe to use that as your needle lubricant. Number one, PCMX skin cleansers, and I'm not going to talk about any brand names, I'm not going to talk about any distributors, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. It is not labeled as a needle lubricant. It is labeled as a skin cleanser. So that means that you're going to be applying it to intact skin. You're going to be applying it in such a way where you're killing any potential pathogens on the surface of the intact skin before you are puncturing the skin with a piercing needle. Now, PCMX is a very versatile chemical. The PCMX abbreviation stands for parachlorometaxylenol. Now, parachlorometaxylenol, PCMX, can come in different strengths and in different dosages. When we're talking about something for cleaning the skin, that can be a concentration of 3% to 5%, and that's going to be for something like a medical grade surgical skin preparation, killing all the pathogens on the surface before the skin is punctured or cut into. Now, there are other different kinds of PCMX products that can be used for hand soap, that can be used for wound wash. This is why I think things get a little bit confusing, because if you go to a piercer, a distributor, a website, or if you just Google in, can PCMX be used as a skin cleanser on broken skin? Can PCMX be used on broken skin? It might say yes, because it can be used to debride a superficial wound. So PCMX on broken skin is not dangerous if you're cleaning a superficial wound. So you have a scraped knee, you have a cut, you have a scratch, you have scarification. Cleaning it with a PCMX soap or skin cleanser might be appropriate. But the big difference that we're talking about with a body piercing lubricant is you're applying it to a needle and then puncturing the skin with that needle and driving that product deeper into the skin. So it's no longer just on open surface superficial skin, it's being driven into a puncture wound. And I want to talk about how some of these chemicals, like how skin disinfectants actually clean the skin. I want to talk about the mechanism of PCMX, how it actually kills germs. So then maybe it can help to clarify why you can't insert it into a puncture wound. Am I going in the right direction, or am I stepping on my words?
No, I think you're going in the right direction, but just to kind of break it up for a second. So you were talking about the different strengths of PCMX products, ranging from 0.5% to 1% for hand soaps, up to 5% for surgical scrubs. A PCMX product that people might not think about as a PCMX product, but as a common household product, is Dettol, which is 5%. However, it's heavily diluted for bathing. So for example, you can bathe with Dettol for certain medical conditions, but the dilution rate for that depending on what it is obviously, is approximately 2 tablespoons in a bathtub. So we're talking about taking something that's 5% originally and then having a bathtub full of it with only 2 tablespoons. So that's why there is such a chasm of misinformation and misunderstanding, especially in the age of ChatGPT, where if you're, searching or Googling or whatever, is PCMX safe for this thing or that thing, it's probably going to say yes, but it's not going to go into the specifics of the application, the strength, the exposure time, all of these other nuanced things. So I think you're definitely going in the right direction when you talk about how the inside of the body does not have skin in it. The outside of the body has skin.
Yeah.
The inside of the body has no, I don't know, I know it sounds scary and I don't mean to break this to you, but there isn't skin inside your body.
Yeah, like some of these products, like if you apply it to intact skin, even if it's a rather strong concentration of it, it's not going to be harmful to the body. It will be harmful to pathogens on the body, but it won't be harmful to the body. But what happens if you take those similar higher concentration products and you insert it into the body, insert it into a puncture wound, or if you leave it on something like mucous membrane, without rinsing, without wiping, without cleaning it away, you can cause chemical burns essentially, you can cause blistering, all these different things.
So PCMX or parachlorometaxylenol, which I have to read phonetically, which you just know.
Yeah, parachlorometaxylenol.
Shut up. Parachlorometaxylenol. I promise your phone's not having a problem right now. That's just me trying to talk. Is a disinfectant that works by killing pathogens, by killing cells. It's cytoxic. That's what cytoxic means, is that it kills cells. But it doesn't just kill the bad cells, the harmful things that you want to kill on the surface of your skin. It also kills your cells inside your body. So basically, when PCMX gets inside the body, it can be a harsh caustic agent inside the body. It can cause severe irritation, burns, tissue death. It can also cause inflammation because you can have almost like an allergic reaction response to it as well. So these chemicals and similar products that are meant for surfaces of the skin, they damage human cells, and this can cause issues with wound healing, with piercing healing, with immediate responses to healing like inflammation, redness, that sort of thing as well. Another example would be something like chlorhexidine, which is different, but that's also for external use. So that would be products people might be familiar with, like Hibiclens, Hibiscrub, that type of thing. Might be safe for disinfecting skin outside of the body, but same thing, shouldn't be exposed to inside of the body.
So PCMX, it can be in lots of different concentrations, and the same concentration that can be safe to use on top of the skin, on surface skin to disinfect, can be harmful once it's introduced into a puncture wound. So applying a skin cleanser to intact skin, using it appropriately, which will include potentially wiping away excess liquid product, that's not going to be harmful to your intact skin. That will be harmful to the pathogens on your intact skin. There are also different kinds of PCMX products that you can apply to open wounds for wound care. I use a PCMX soap for healing scarification. There is lots of different PCMX soaps for various wound care for medical applications. So it can be safe to use on broken skin, but again, it's not the same thing as introducing it into a puncture wound. So if you're taking your body piercing needle, dipping it into a PCMX skin cleanser, and then driving that into a puncture wound, what you're doing is you're introducing a chemical that will be damaging the skin that you've just punctured. So it's going to make the piercing more red, more irritated. It's going to make it more challenging for that wound to heal because you've introduced a chemical into the puncture wound that should not be there because it's an irritant when it's used for that application.
Right. And another example of the different ways that the disinfectant products that we use in the industry and even just in our homes and in first aid can be how some products are bactericidal and some products are bacteriostatic. And a lot of the time, they can be the same product, depending on the strength and the exposure. So just to give a few more kind of definitions to these words to help them seem a little bit more transparent, bactericidal refers to something that kills bacteria. Bacteriostatic refers to something that prevents bacteria from multiplying. So it doesn't necessarily kill the bacteria, but it stops it from multiplying. Good example would be antibiotics being bacteriostatic. Chlorhexidine, which is something that you'll find as a mouthwash in the UK. I know that it's weird you can't get it in the US for some reason. Chlorhexidine is bactericidal, but at a lower concentration, like in mouthwash, it's bacteriostatic. So it's often used after, oral, like wisdom tooth removal, that sort of thing. So a lot of these terms, they can overlap with each other and it's not always cut and dried, but that's what makes it so important to understand specifically what you're using and how the application in which you're using it affects the impact of that product.
Yeah, sometimes PCMX skin cleansers, especially like one in particular that I'm thinking of, but I'm not going to mention the brand name. Sometimes it's sold as like, oh, it's this miracle product that can be used for so many different things. But it's like, you can't just decide to use it for an off-label purpose and just expect it to have the same level of safety. So a big thing too, aside from the fact that the product will cause damage to the cells if inserted into a puncture wound, aside from that, it's a non-sterile product. So why in the world would you take your carefully sterilized body piercing needle and then dip it into a non-sterile product and use that as lubricant? So there are so many different red flags for me when people are using PCMX as a body piercing lubricant, whether it's for a needle or even just a taper installing jewelry in a healed piercing. I would still call that a puncture wound, and I would still say that it's inappropriate to use a PCMX skin cleanser for those purposes. So PCMX is safe to use on intact skin. It is safe to use, depending on the concentration, it is safe to use on broken skin for a wound cleanser, but it is still not safe to use on a puncture wound, which is what a body piercing is. So please, no using PCMX as your needle or taper lubricant. If we compare it to something else that's a very common skin cleanser, something like iodine, it would be a lot more cut and dry. Like nobody out there is dipping their needle in iodine and using that as a lubricant. So why is it okay for you to dip a needle into PCMX and use that as a lubricant? So if you're posting content about that, you really want to be careful that you're not inadvertently, accidentally including something like this that I would consider to be an unsafe work practice.
Ironically, iodine, I think, like 10% povidone iodine can come into contact with the inside of the body, but like you say, it's not sterile.
Yeah. You can't really sterilize the povidone in povidone iodine. Povidone is an aqueous polymer that's like basically the carrier of iodine. Iodine itself is typically like a powdered product, and then it's combined with povidone iodine, and that's typically what we're using as like a diluted iodine solution for skin cleansing. You can also use iodine for surgical wound irrigation. Different things will have different strengths for different applications, but nobody is using iodine as a needle lubricant. So I want you to also think of PCMX in that same category of this is for the exterior of the body, this is not for the interior of the body.
I mean, not that it's hugely relevant, because I don't like to think that any of us are performing surgery in our piercing studios, but for something like surgical site irrigation, iodine or like 10% povidone iodine or betadine would be diluted again further. But then that just makes me wonder, is it like 3% of 10% or is it 3%, But then that's just a maths problem.
Yeah, that's
I bet Brian would know.
Brian would know.
Yeah.
So, okay, if we talked about the things that you should not be using for a needle lubricant, let's talk about the stuff that you can be using safely.
Saliva. So just out of interest, like, do you use lubricant for, I think I use more lubricant than you at work. Do you use lubricant for piercing? Because not everyone even does.
I rarely use lubricants. I would say the most common thing I'm using a lubricant for would be jewelry changes or stretches. So I'm really only using lubricants for piercings below the waist to give people maybe just a little bit of greater comfort.
From the drag.
Yeah, but like I'm using coated needles. So my needles are either coated in a medical grade silicone or a medical grade Teflon. That's safe for internal use. So I'm using needles that are pre-coated with a lubricant. So I don't find that I need to add an additional lubricant to that. But sometimes I will for like larger gauge piercings below the waist or a stretch or something, just to give a little extra comfort to the client.
So for me, I probably use lubricant 2/3 of the time for piercing, I would say, would be a guess. And what I tend to base it on, honestly, is like the touch and texture and feel of the person's skin. So like, you know, when you go to do an earlobe piercing and you always feel, or if you're me anyway, you always feel the person beforehand. And you just feel the texture of their skin. And sometimes when I'm feeling someone's earlobe or their nostril or their nipple, like sometimes it just feels wafer thin, you know? Like it doesn't even matter how thick it is. It's just more to do with the texture. Sometimes it's thinner and softer. Sometimes it feels a lot more solid and dense. And I know that I'm gonna need more force to get the needle through. Like even if it's a really good quality needle, you can tell by like the texture of something, how much force you're gonna have to apply. And if I'm feeling something and it feels to me like it's gonna take a bit more force, like I'll prefer to use the lubricant as just like an act of mercy.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't have a problem with using a lubricant, but I rarely feel like I need it. I rarely feel like it would be a benefit to the piercing because I'm just like, I'm the bevel theory guy, or one of them, you know? Like I'm super duper comfortable with bevel theory, with needle modification, with utilizing those methods to reduce friction, reduce drag. So
Yeah.
I feel like I have it dialed in pretty well for that. But I'll use lubricant when I feel like it would be a benefit. But what I'm using when I use lubricant is very specific. So it's a water-based sterile lubricant and it's an individual serving size. It's a little, what do you call them? A sachet?
Sachet.
A sachet or a pillow pack. Like a little blister pack. Pillow pack.
Sachet.
This pillow pack is more of a term for like sexual lubricant.
Is it?
That's when I've heard it referred to, a pillow pack. It's not because
Really?
it's for like a bed. It just means it's a little puffy. But they're usually sold with like, you know, dildos and stuff that goes up your butt or whatever.
Right, but if you were asking for some ketchup in McDonald's, you wouldn't ask for a pillow pack of ketchup. You'd ask for a sachet.
No, you wouldn't. You would ask for a packet
Get your
because
ass
this is
kicked
America.
if you ask for a sachet.
Yeah. Anyway, so the thing is that it's an individual packet of lubricant. It's not like a big tube of toothpaste where I'm like onto a surface or onto a needle or something like that. So when you have a product and you're dispensing it from like a larger bottle, sometimes it's going to pull air back into that bottle, back in. So if you have something that's a pump, or if you have something that's a squeezy bottle or something like that, and you're squeezing product out of it, when you release the tension to squeeze that product out, the packaging might be pulling air back into that liquid, and it could potentially be contaminating it. So that's why I'm only going to use a single serving of skin lubricant. I'm also going to make sure that it's water-based lubricant because I want the body to be able to break it down. So unlike Vaseline, which just sits there in a clump of petroleum inside the wound, water-based lubricant can be broken down by the natural water in our body. And then there was something that you also brought up about a water-based lubricant that's important too.
Was there?
Isotonic.
Yeah. So isotonic is also a term that is sometimes going to be attributed to lubricant. So when we use sterile saline to clean piercings and aftercare, the reason that we use saline, the 0.9, I'm saying it right, aren't I? 0.9%.
Sure.
Sterile saline is it's isotonic. So what that means, I think, is that it doesn't have any effect on the water balance on the cells in your skin. It doesn't.
The salinity. It is the salt level of the
salt
product.
level,
Yeah,
not the water level.
Isotonic is the same level of salt as your body, and then hypertonic is more salt, and hypotonic is less salt.
Right, but does that not also affect the water content?
I don't know.
Because if, you know what? Let's just
We're experts, folks.
Let's go and we'll read some books about this stuff and we'll come back. Anyway, so the reason that we use the sterile saline is that it is not supposed to make our cells more or less salty or watery or whatever, okay? And if they're vinegary, something's gone wrong. So you can also get isotonic lubricant for the same reason. However, it's not always something that's going to be attributed to our use. For example, you can get like vaginal lubricant for sex. I don't know what I mean. I'm sorry, I don't know why.
I married you.
Yeah, you did. You can get isotonic lubricant
for sex
for sexual purposes, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be suitable for body piercing. So like you can get individual sachets of water-based lubricant, but they might specifically be for sexual lubrication, not for wound lubrication, because they might have other things in them, like they could be, scented or whatever else. So do a little bit of research, but try and make sure that you're using an individually packaged, sterile, water-based lubricant for your body piercings. If you feel merciful, like I do, and want to
if he
try
dies, he dies.
Yeah, whereas Captain Bevel Theory over here is just raw dogging all of his piercings.
Anyway, and sterile is something else that I want to drive home the importance of, because like we go through all this work to make sure that our needles and our jewelry and our instruments are sterilized properly. Why would you take a sterile needle and dip it into something non-sterile? Why would you take your sterile needle and render it non-sterile and then drive it into a puncture wound that you're creating? So there's not a lot of logic behind the PCMX's lubricant. I think it just falls into the category of convenience for the people that are using it. It's just a slippery product that they already have out on their tray. And that is not good enough by my standard. It needs to be purpose specific if you're inserting it into a puncture wound. It needs to be tested. It needs to be labeled as safe for that use for a puncture wound.
Yes.
Thanks. So are we winding it down after this, or what are we doing next?
I know for some people, topics like this can be a little bit of a snore, but I think that this stuff is super interesting. I like learning what words mean. Apparently, I still have a lot left to learn. But I like talking about this stuff because I think it helps connect the dots between like knowing an answer and understanding an answer. Because those are two very different things. Yeah. And I think that that's really what we're getting at, is that like it's fine to know the answer to something, but like understanding why that's the answer can be really interesting, it can be really fun, and it can better inform your piercing practice overall, really. So I hope that some people manage to learn a couple of new things, or maybe understand terminology they didn't before, or potentially people may have just gotten dumber listening to me talk. I don't know.
So is that it? Is that the end?
Is it?
All right. So I think we're going to wrap up the episode here. Let me say thank you to everyone who came to my online bevel theory webinar yesterday. That was a really fun one. It was a really fun group of people with some great questions, and I'll probably do another one of those again, maybe in the fall. We'll see you at the APP conference if you're going to be there. If you're a UK APP member, vote for Jordan Jones for the board of directors. Really excited to see Jordan get that opportunity. I'm excited to see you be a board member at conference this year, and then see how frustrated you get by it by the end of the week. And then maybe we'll wrap this up, and then you can do a little 30-second bit on isotonic after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you want me to just Google isotonic?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, do you want to say anything to wrap up?
You married me, and there's no takesies backsies.
No, you're right. All right. Thanks for listening to the podcast, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved. So while Lola researches the definition of isotonic, I am going to try to fill some space because I only want her to take 30 seconds to research isotonic. I'm working on some new stuff for my Patreon page. I'm working on my April video. I don't want to say what it is just yet because it's one that I've been holding on to for a little while because it's a very unique anatomical variation. So I'm excited to show that. I look forward to making a part 2 of the scrotal piercing video. And if you haven't already seen it, the part 1 of scrotal piercing video is just launched. And I can't advertise it on Instagram. So if you want to go and watch that on Patreon, I'd greatly appreciate it. Have you researched isotonic and what that means in relation to
Well, listen to
lubricant?
this. Listen to this.
Hit me.
Isotonic solutions have equal solute concentrations to human blood, causing no net fluid shift between compartments. That sounds a whole lot like what I fucking said. Fluid is water. Water is fluid. And look at this little picture. It says H2O. If I learned anything from watching that Adam Sandler film, The Water Boy, H2O is water.
Moisture is the essence of wetness.
Suck it.
All right. So is that it? We're done then?
Yeah, we're done.
We're done.
We're done.